Okay, that's on. All right, for this week, we read chapters 12 and 13. And first, we're going to discuss the ways that you believe organizations can prepare leaders at all levels to respond in a crisis. Discussion the communication issues faced by BP in the spill and the failures of crisis communication. First.
I'll say that you can't ever really prepare for every single crisis. I mean, the biggest crisis is usually financial. You know, for instance, your sales go down and, you know, the economy. So many companies got hit with the economy. And the only way to prepare for that is to stockpile cash. And nobody wants to do that. So, you know, you can prepare and try to come up with some kind of ideas. If our revenues go down 20%, we're going to cut our workforce by 15%. You know, you can do things like that. But in the case of something huge like what happened to BP or what happened to 9/11, all those businesses in the Twin Towers, it's just impossible to plan for something like that, you know. So to have a disaster plan, to have a financial plan, to have a fire plan, you know, to do all this is just really not. I don't think it's a lot of effort, a lot of time, and I don't think a lot of companies want to do it personally. So, I mean, that's been my experience in working in companies. The biggest disaster plans we come up with are financial. You know, I mean, if a fire happens or something like that, of course we have a fire evacuation plan and we have those types of things. But as far as how to get the business up and running, you just hope the insurance companies pay you and you use that capital to get going. Yeah. You know, I mean, there's your plan. You know, so that's my thing.
Right. I think in the aspect of safety, it sounds like sometimes you need someone watching the safety managers too, because in the way of BP, people weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. So it's almost like they need to be managed, or someone else needs to be making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, because a lot of that could have been avoided if the safety managers were doing their job. So, but then again, yeah, do you want to have now you have to have a babysitter for the manager when the manager should just be doing their job. So maybe they should be having some kind of evaluations and constantly being up on that, especially when it comes to safety, because that's super important. Yeah. In those kind of aspects. So to make sure that it's very up to code all the time and they're doing all the correct things. So maybe the evaluations need to be monthly or weekly to make sure that they're really avoiding any situations like that. I mean, BP was having people die once a year, it sounded like. So that's probably not something they want just to let go, you know?
Yeah. I was really like surprised by the CEO's comments about, you know, after the spill and everything, and like his general attitude about the situation. It's just like, you know, kind of like, oh, it's just a spill, it'll be fine, you know, like, or I'm over it, I'm going on vacation type of thing. Yeah. Like, wow. Like, crisis does require a lot of a leader, you know, like it takes a lot of figuring out and all those things. And like you said, Robin, like you cannot prepare fully for those things. But I thought it was pretty neat how like in the text, people sort of prepare for those things by like doing those evaluations and by like kind of keeping their eyes open for any type of crisis scenario. So yeah, and every time I read about 9/11, like it really it just like really upsets me too, like as more and more is like being uncovered, like, oh, so they saw the gap in security within our airlines and nobody did anything about it. You know what I mean? Like it just, and I understand like, you know, terrorism is terrorism, but like things could have been prevented and if we had been vigilant and hadn't become complacent, then we could have maybe combated it a lot better than we did. But That's just my tidbit.
Right, and it's unfortunate that most of these entities are businesses, so they look at everything with a business mind, and they take risk as, okay, how many people can we lose? Or like with food, how much rat poop can we have in the cereal and whatever? I mean, they have measurements for these things. So yeah, it's unfortunate that they look at safety as not, oh, we want to be 100%, but how much can we handle before we have to really make sure we're doing what is supposed to be done.
That reminds me of what Kant said, and like treating people as like sort of like a means to an end. You know, it's just like, these are still individuals with families and everything else. Like, I know you want to make $1, but these are lives we're talking about, you know?
Yeah, but a lot of times businesses, they don't care. I mean, honestly, capitalism does not care about people. Right. It's all about risk versus value. So if I like, there's a story of Ford. You guys are all too young to know the Ford Pinto. It was this little hatchback that had the gas tank right in the back. So if it got rear-ended, it had a defect that would cause the whole thing to explode.
I think I read about that. Yeah,
that was in our book. And they ran the numbers and said, well, how many lawsuits would it cost? You know, how many times do we probably think this will happen? That's going to cost this amount. And fixing the defect out of millions of cars that are out there, that's going to cost this amount. Oh, well, let's just go ahead and go with the deaths and the lawsuits, because that's cheaper than actually fixing the defect. I mean, oh my gosh, are you kidding? You know,
I feel like that's a very short-term way of looking at everything, though, because if you hurt enough people, I mean, they were paying people billions of dollars in lawsuits. I don't think that's enough to, they could have went a cheaper route by just taking care of this issue beforehand.
Right, but they just consider like the probability of something actually happening, and then they're like, well, we could risk it. You know, it's like,
yeah. You do have a risk. Somebody is called a risk manager, and they manage your risk, and that is exactly what they look at. And one of the things Melissa was saying, which was good about having monitoring the safety managers. So there are companies now, which is it's a great business. They make good money. But it's a business that will come in and assess your risk or assess your safety program or they will do it, and they will give you give the CEO and the upper management a code, if you will, of this is, you know, good, this is bad. And so you have outside companies that come in and do that for you. But of course that costs money. And what companies want to pay that? You know what I mean? So
right, especially if they're already trying to cut costs by letting people die, then why are they going to have people check on the safety manager?
Yeah.
I just felt like it was so sad, like the way that the BP manager, like in the conference, he just had like no empathy or like no like human connection. He was just like, well, I'm not like an expert on this, so I didn't know what was happening. But still, people are dying in your company, and you take the measure, and you're working in like such a dangerous field. You're working with oil, and if there's been like a fire every day in the past, then if you're not learning from the past, and if you're not addressing these issues, and if you are addressing them the way that he did, it's just going to give your company a bad rep. So I just feel like overall, like communication and this management is really important, and to take responsibility and to be honest and not let the thing get as out of hand as they did, like with this company.
Yeah, so true. I think people focus too much on like, oh, I made a mistake or I made the problem. I think it's not that we all realize that we're all human. It's what you do after the fact, right? It's like, okay, did you own it or did you blame someone else? Oh, I'm not the expert. Oh, but you employ everyone here and you oversee everything. So yeah.
Right. At the deposition, he even said that.
I know. I was so angry when I watched that video.
But at the deposition, he even said that, oh, I'm sorry, or what did he say? He said something like, I feel bad, and the guy responded, I don't care about how you feel. What are you going to do about fixing this?
Right.
Yeah. At this point, you're too late for sorries. What is your plan now? What are you going to do to stop this? Because this is an ongoing issue.
Right. It's so funny that no one, like, he didn't want to take credit when things were going wrong. But of course, when, you know, everything's
Yeah,
good
when
with
the
numbers.
crap hits the fan, of course you're going to say
I'm
sorry.
not the expert, but I made it happen. Like, whatever.
Right.
Do you do. Sorry.
No, it's just funny. It's terrible that like, and they went through how many CEOs and how many years they just kept going through them because they just weren't managing this company right. And they have to have like risk management in those kind of companies, like oil companies or anything that's working with like chemicals, especially one that had like explosions where like people were dying all the time.
Yeah.
Bad move on.
Well, the video said that they were even hiring people that weren't super qualified for that. They weren't all the way educated on what they were supposed to be looking for. And so they were marking them off on things that were okay, and then they really weren't okay.
God.
And then they even signed they signed non-disclosure agreements so that if it came back on them, they couldn't say anything about it. And so the company would just make it like they weren't liable. So.
Oh, that's so terrible.
But I do
I
want to
feel like
say,
this company was like example, just like bad crisis management or bad like risk assessments to avoid the crises.
right. And why did they keep having those same leaders? Where was the development for those leaders? Why were they just allowing them to continue to be that way? Who's the manager of that one leader, the worst of them all, right? Who's to stop them?
I just feel like there's so much money like covering up issues in those type of industries that then of like people losing their lives just gets ignored, just gets like pushed to the side because there's so much money involved with those kinds of companies.
Right.
Well, in a publicly traded company, the CEO answers to is the board of directors. But of course, the board of directors' job is to make the shareholders happy. So what kind of profit do you have? We want to see, record profits. If you're a shareholder of BP and you're also a shareholder of Exxon, and you're thinking, why is their shares going up 2% and your shares are only going up 1%? Well, once again, it all comes down to money and greed.
Right.
So, so it's really sad, and it's important. It's really important for all of us as we go out there and become leaders ourselves to make that decision of, are we going to be the ones that say, no, planning is important, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to change this culture of risk management. Like it's losing one life is not worth anything.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's why it's when we read books like this or chapters like this, and it talks to us, it speaks to us, but then we hear stories and watch videos of like BP and go, wow, are you kidding? That's even possible that could happen? But it does. The higher the ladder up you go, the more people are looking to you to make sure that profit is good. And if that's cutting a program.
Well, just like Enron, I mean, that was a whole different story. I mean, they didn't have anything as far as they were killing people, but they were just stealing money so much. They had, like, what was it, $538 million or $1 billion they took in like a 3-year period of time, and people weren't even noticing it. And finally, at some point, shareholders were noticing it, and that's when they finally wanted to do something about it. And they still didn't admit it until the end when they were getting investigated. And then they wanted to throw away all of their information and hide and cover up. Like the book says, it's better to at least admit your faults and take responsibility and show that you want to fix it rather than just continue being sleazy. And that's all they did, was continue to be sleazy.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
How much time do we have?
Yeah. We have like 2 minutes. Or like 1. So we can end now if you guys are we done?
Okay.